The smell of disinfectant and betrayal hit Sawyer Maddox's nose harder than the bullet that had severely damaged his spine. He woke up and tried to move his legs. Nothing. 2 dead slabs of flesh clung to his body, silent, unmoving, as if they had never belonged to him. The man who used to make all of South Chicago afraid with nothing but a frown now couldn't even twitch his smallest toe. But that wasn't the worst part. The legal severance and asset release papers arrived before the anesthesia had even fully faded. Signed, stamped, discarded. Neat as tossing away a used tissue. Camille Ashworth, the woman he'd been going to marry, the woman he'd handed the penthouse key and the safe code, didn't even bother to show her face. Only her lawyer's ice-cold voice came through the phone speaker. Miss Ashworth requests no further contact. She has moved out. Moved out. While he couldn't move from the waist down, the hospital room became a prison. The IV line crawled into his arm like an accusation. Every beep from the monitor reminded him he was alive but abandoned, breathing but worthless. His phone, with 23 missed calls before the ambush, now lay still like a corpse for days on end. His men vanished. His partners turned their backs. The entire underworld empire he'd built over 15 years with blood and sweat, not a single person called. As if the bullet hadn't only pierced his spine, but had also punched straight through every relationship he'd ever believed was untouchable. Then Rafe came, the only right hand who remained loyal, eyes red, voice strangled, carrying news more brutal than the diagnosis of likely permanent paralysis. "Boss." Camille cleaned out the penthouse. Cash, jewelry, documents, she took everything. The joint accounts have been drained almost dry. Then he added, "And that ambush, it wasn't random. Someone inside the organization tipped them off. Wade's response time was too fast. Like your brother was already prepared for you to be taken out of the game. His own brother. His blood. Possibly the man who'd put that bullet in his back." And then Wade Maddox appeared for real. Expensive suit. Cold face. Not a single word of concern. Only an offer. "The South Side needs an operator. You can't sit in a wheelchair and command your people. Sign the transfer papers. 72 hours. After that, I'll take it myself." Vultures don't wait for prey to fully die. They tear the flesh the moment they smell weakness. And Sawyer's vultures wore suits, carried the Maddox name, and called him Little Brother. That night, Sawyer didn't sleep. He stared at his legs, 2 foreign objects attached to his body, refusing every order. He tried to wiggle a toe. No. He tried to bend a knee. No. The lower half of him had become a grave, and he was buried alive inside it. The man who once decided life and death for an entire neighborhood couldn't command even his own toe. The dark whispered sweet things. It would be so easy. Just let go. Stop fighting. Stop hoping. Stop enduring the parade of people marching past his hospital bed with eyes full of pity or hunger or contempt. His almost wife had left with the safe. His brother had come with a contract to steal what was left. His men had come with silence, the worst betrayal of all. His hand slid past the nurse call button, drifting slowly toward the IV line. Just pull once. Just once. Sawyer Maddox, the South Side boss of Chicago, would end not by an enemy's bullet, but by giving up the fight for his next breath, on a hospital bed that reeked of bleach. "Take your hand off it." The voice tore through the darkness like a blade. Sawyer snapped his head toward the door. She stood there, backlit by the fluorescent hallway glow, thin, brown hair tied up in a hurry, old bruises on her wrists she didn't bother to hide. Her eyes didn't flinch at what he'd become, the hollow, abandoned, shattered shell of a boss. She wasn't a nurse, not a doctor. Her clothes were too plain, too thin for a Chicago night, but she carried the confidence of someone who had walked through hell and come out the other side with her spine intact. Even if the long scar along her arm told a different story. "I'm Josie, your new caregiver." She stepped in and set her bag on the floor with the practiced motion of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. "And before you start your speech about how you don't need anyone's help, save it. I've heard every version of that speech. None of them work on me." Sawyer, the man who used to silence an entire city with a look, opened his mouth to push back, but there was something in her voice, not cruel yet not yielding, that cut through the thick fog of self-pity he'd wrapped around himself for days. "I don't need a babysitter," he ground out through his teeth. "You need someone to stop you from doing something stupid." Her eyes flicked to his hand still hovering near the IV line. "And judging by what you were just about to do, you really do." Sawyer jerked his hand back as if burned. Who dared talk to him like this? His men didn't dare. Camille didn't dare. Even Wade chose to circle around his words. But this skinny girl, with old bruises and eyes that didn't know how to bow, looked straight at a paralyzed mafia boss and said, in a calm voice that was almost maddening, I don't know if you're going to truly fight, or if you're just going to lie here proving all of them right, that you were only strong when life was still easy, that when your power gets stripped away, there's nothing left of you. Silence. Long, heavy. The monitor beeped steadily, like a countdown. Then something flared in Sawyer's chest. Not hope, not yet, but rage. Pure, boiling anger aimed at a stranger who dared judge him, but deeper than that, aimed at himself, because she was right. Every word of it. And the truth always hurt more than a bullet. Fine, he snarled, his voice like gravel scraping across broken glass. What's your plan? Josie Brennan smiled, a smile sharp as a knife. Not warm, not sweet, but real in a way that was almost brutal. First, keep you alive. Then, make you dangerous again. And she didn't know, not yet, that the man in that wheelchair had once been the most dangerous man in this city, that he hadn't only lost his legs, he was losing an entire empire, that someone wanted him dead, someone wanted him alive but obedient, and the bullet in his back might have come from his own blood. She also didn't know, not yet, that he would be the one to help her get back the most precious thing she had lost. A 5-year-old daughter named Phoebe, with curly hair, who loved the color purple, who was afraid of thunder, out there somewhere, drawing pictures for her mother every day that no one sent, but all of that came later. For now there was only a hospital room that smelled of bleach, the steady beep of the monitor, and 2 strangers full of scars staring at each other across 2 meters like looking into a mirror. One who once held the power of life and death, now unable to bathe himself. One who had once been beaten until bones broke, now refusing to let anyone fall. The story begins here. If this story touched your heart, please tap like to give strength to characters who are forcing themselves upright from the rubble. Share this video, because somewhere out there someone might need to hear that it isn't over yet, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next part, where Sawyer and Josie step into the real fight. 5 o'clock in the morning. Josie yanked the curtains open as if tearing away the last layer of darkness Sawyer was hiding inside. Sunlight flooded the hospital room, ruthless, uninvited, shining straight onto the face of the man lying motionless on the bed like a breathing corpse. Get up. Physical therapy starts in 30 minutes. Before that, you need to wash, get dressed, and eat breakfast. There was no room for negotiation in her voice. Sawyer looked at her with the same stare that 6 months ago had made the hardest men in South Chicago lower their heads. Josie didn't move. She had seen that look last night when she walked in and pulled his hand away from the IV line. It hadn't worked then, and it didn't work now. I don't need anyone to bathe me, Sawyer ground out, trying to haul himself upright with his arms. His arms trembled. His abdominal muscles clenched. The lower half of his body lay there like 2 rotting beams of wood, refusing every signal his brain sent down. He fell back against the mattress, gasping, sweat beading on his forehead though he'd done nothing but attempt to sit up. You just proved that you do, Josie said, not mocking, not pitying, simply stating a fact the way someone might read the temperature off a thermometer. She had everything prepared. Towels, soap, clean clothes, a basin of warm water. Her hands worked quickly, decisively, professionally. And Sawyer Maddox, the man who once commanded an entire neighborhood with a nod, lay there gritting his teeth while a thin young woman washed his body as if she were tending to a child. He fixed his eyes on the ceiling, counted every stain, tried to pretend he was somewhere else, anywhere but this hospital bed where the last of his dignity was being wrung out drop by drop. You're grinding your teeth hard enough to crack the enamel, Josie said evenly, her hands never pausing. Relax. This is medical care. Not a sentence. Easy for you to say. It's not easy. 3 years ago, a nurse named Phil had to do this for me every day for 4 months. He was almost 6'3", hands like shovels, and I lay there unable to move because I had 3 broken ribs and a fractured skull. Sawyer turned his head to look at her. Josie didn't look back. Her hands continued their work, her eyes focused, but her voice carried something heavier than water and soap. Dignity isn't about what someone has to do to your body. It's about how you face it. You can lie here feeling sorry for yourself until moss grows on you, or you can accept that this is temporary, necessary, and nothing to be ashamed of." She said temporary with the certainty of someone who had once been told permanent and had proven the doctors wrong. Sawyer didn't ask more. Not yet, but he stored it away. Broken ribs, fractured skull, 4 months unable to move. Who had done that to her? Physical therapy took place in the rehabilitation room on the 3rd floor. Dr. Pham, a petite woman with a patience so steady it bordered on merciless, greeted them with an optimism Sawyer wanted to punch. "Good morning. Today we'll begin with a basic assessment. I'll check reflexes, muscle tone, and upper range of motion. 3 hours. 3 hours of hell." Dr. Pham bent, lifted, rotated, and positioned his unfeeling legs into every imaginable angle, while Sawyer could only tell they were moving because he could see them. No pain, no ache, nothing at all. And nothing at all was worse than any pain, because pain at least proved he was alive below the waist. "Your upper body is very strong," Dr. Pham said, making notes. "The lower half will need time to accurately assess the extent of the nerve damage, but I want you focusing on your arms, shoulders, and core. That's the foundation for everything that comes next." "Everything that comes next means what?" Sawyer asked directly. "That I'll walk again?" Dr. Pham glanced at Josie. Josie gave a small nod, permission to be honest. "Every patient is different, Doctor." Pham chose her words carefully. "Your injury affects multiple neural pathways. Full recovery is very difficult, but improvement is possible. Upper body strength, independent wheelchair mobility, even brief standing in the future, all of that is within reach if you persist." "If I persist," Sawyer repeated, his voice flat as a tabletop. Not a question. The rest of the session was a gentle kind of torture. Light weights, resistance bands, sitting upright without back support. Sweat poured down Sawyer's face. His hands shook so badly he could barely grip his water bottle. His body, once the sharpest weapon he possessed, now betrayed him in every movement. Josie stood beside him the entire time. No loud cheering, no empty encouragement. She simply observed, occasionally correcting his posture with a light but firm touch. And when he wanted to quit halfway through, she said only one thing. 2 more rounds. Not a request, a statement. On the way back to his room, Sawyer was too exhausted to even muster anger. Josie pushed the wheelchair down the hallway in silence, giving him space. She stopped at his door, turned him inside, helped transfer him onto the bed with motions practiced hundreds of times. "You once said someone saved you." Sawyer spoke suddenly as she was about to leave. "Dr. Helen." Josie stopped, her back still to him. "Who was she to you?" Silence stretched across 3 slow breaths. Then Josie answered, her voice softer than he had ever heard it. "She was the only person who didn't walk away when I wanted to die. She pulled me out of the pit my ex-husband dug for me. Broken ribs, fractured skull. 4 months in a hospital bed. She came every day, every single day, until I could stand on my own. She still didn't turn around. She died more than 2 years ago. Lung cancer. Before she went, she made me promise one thing." "What?" "That I would find the people who were ready to give up and remind them they're stronger than they think. That I would repay her by doing for others what she did for me." Josie stepped out of the room gently, leaving the door open. Sawyer lay there staring at the ceiling, but this time he didn't count stains. He was thinking about a thin woman with old bruises on her wrists and a long scar down her arm, who spoke of broken bones and fractured skulls in the same tone one might use to describe the weather, who honored a promise to the dead by walking into hospital rooms of strangers who wanted to die. That evening, around 9 o'clock, Sawyer couldn't sleep. He rolled his wheelchair into the hallway, needing air, needing to escape the 4 walls that felt smaller every day. And he saw her. Josie sat on a plastic chair at the far end of the corridor near a window overlooking the dark parking lot. Her back curved inward, her head bowed, her phone casting a pale blue light across her face. On the screen was a photograph. A little girl, about 4 or 5 years old, brown curly hair, big eyes, grinning wide, holding up a scribbled drawing in purple crayon with both hands. Josie's finger moved slowly across the screen, as if she were touching the child's cheek through the glass. Then she turned the phone off. Face down, her shoulders shook once, twice, then stilled. She drew in a deep breath, lifted her head, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and stood. She turned, saw Sawyer. They looked at each other across the long corridor. Josie didn't explain, didn't say she was fine. She only gave a small nod, walked past him, and disappeared into the staff room. Sawyer watched until her shadow vanished behind the door. He didn't ask who the child in the photograph was. He didn't ask why she had cried. Not yet. But he knew one thing. Josie Brennan wasn't an ordinary caregiver. She was someone who had walked through hell and come out the other side with her spine intact, but her heart cracked. And she was hiding her own wound. Something deeper than broken ribs, heavier than a fractured skull. Something that had everything to do with a curly-haired little girl who loved the color purple, whose photograph she stroked every night as if afraid the image might fade if she didn't touch it. And Sawyer Maddox, who had lost his legs, lost his fiancée, lost his empire, lying in a hospital room that reeked of chemical sterility. For the first time since he woke up, wasn't thinking about himself. He was thinking about her, about a wound he hadn't yet been given permission to touch. The first week of physical therapy was 7 days of torture disguised beneath Dr. Pham's patient smile and the rubbery smell of resistance bands. Every morning began the same way. 5 o'clock, Josie yanked the curtains open, light spilling in like a sentence, and then the brutal routine repeated. Washing, getting dressed. Breakfast that Sawyer had to force down spoon by spoon, like swallowing sand. Then the gym. Then pain. Then sweat. Then failure. Then pain again. On the third day, Dr. Pham sat down across from Sawyer after the session, a clipboard in her hand, her face calm but her eyes not sliding away from his the way the other nurses always did. "I'm going to be direct," she said, "because I think you're the type who'd rather hear the truth than comfort." Sawyer nodded. Josie stood against the wall, arms folded, her eyes fixed on Dr. Pham. "Your spinal injury is severe. Multiple neural pathways are badly damaged. The odds of fully restoring function in both legs are very low. I'm not saying it's impossible, because medicine never says never. But if you're asking me what the most realistic goal is right now, it's maximizing your upper body, arm strength, core strength, the ability to transfer from bed to wheelchair on your own, to move independently, to care for yourself. That's the foundation. Everything else, standing, stepping, walking, if it comes, will come later. And it will come slowly." The rehab room went quiet. The air conditioner hummed. Sawyer looked down at his legs, 2 foreign objects on the table, still, numb, as if they belonged to someone else and someone had mistakenly installed them on his body. "How slow?" he asked, his voice flat. "A few months for the first meaningful gains. A few years for the farther goals. And I need you to understand that progress isn't a straight line. There'll be days you feel better, and there'll be days you feel like you're back at the starting line." "Doctor," Pham set the clipboard down, "the only question I need you to answer is this. Are you willing to work every day even when you don't see results right away?" Sawyer didn't answer with words. He reached for the 2-kilogram dumbbell beside the table, lifted it, lowered it, lifted it, lowered it. His eyes stayed locked on Dr. Pham. She smiled. "All right, then we begin." From the 3rd day on, Sawyer trained as if his body were the enemy and he was fighting for his life. He pulled the bands until his shoulder muscles burned like fire tearing through them. He lifted weights until his arms shook so badly the water bottle slipped from his fingers. He practiced sitting upright without support until his abdominal muscles spasmed and sweat dripped from his chin onto thighs he couldn't feel. Josie stayed beside him through every session. She didn't cheer. She didn't say good job. She pushed when he slowed, corrected his posture when he was wrong, and when he wanted to stop, she said only, "Not finished." But she also knew when to stop. On the 5th day, Sawyer tried to lift the 3-kilogram weight for the 15th time in a row, and his right hand began to jerk out of his control. He clenched his jaw, trying to force one more set. Josie put her hand on his arm. "Light, but final." "That's enough," she said. "Tomorrow's still there. I can keep going." "You can, but you shouldn't. There's a difference between pushing the limit and destroying your body. I've seen enough people confuse the two." Something in her voice, a flicker of tremor, so fast it was almost inaudible, made Sawyer lower the weight. She wasn't speaking from theory. She was speaking from a scar, and he'd learned enough to know this. When Josie Brennan's voice shook, that was when she was telling the hardest truth. That same evening, when Josie stepped out to get medication and the room was empty, Sawyer reached for his phone. Not the hospital phone. His private one. The phone Rafe had brought on the 2nd day, hidden in his jacket pocket, saying nothing, simply placing it on the table and giving a single nod. Sawyer dialed. Rafe answered before the first ring could finish. "Boss. Report." And the second war began. Sawyer's voice on the phone was nothing like the one he used with Josie or Dr. Pham. Colder, sharper. Each word weighed like a bullet before it slid into the chamber. His legs were paralyzed, but his mind wasn't. And that mind, the one that had built an underworld empire from nothing over 15 years, was running again at a speed Rafe recognized from the first sentence. The boss was back. Rafe's report was clean and tight. The Southside territory was holding for now, because 3 senior lieutenants were keeping the line steady. Wade hadn't made any major moves since Sawyer refused to sign the transfer papers. But the real problem was somewhere else. "Dutton," Rafe said, voice low. "I dug deeper like you asked. He sent information about the West Warehouse transport line to Wade exactly 2 weeks before the ambush. Schedule, route, number of guards, everything." Silence. Sawyer breathed in slowly, exhaled even slower. Dutton. A mid-level man Sawyer had trusted for 6 years. A man who had sat at his table, drank whiskey in his penthouse, called him boss with a reverence. Sawyer now understood, had only been varnish painted over rotten wood. "Cut off his money," Sawyer said. No anger, no shouting. His voice was flat as a frozen lake, and Rafe knew that was when he was most dangerous. "Close every linked account, cut every channel into our system. Nobody trades with him, talks to him, or even breathes in the same direction as him. Total isolation. Let him run." "No direct handling?" Rafe asked carefully. "No. He'll run to Wade or run out of the city. Either way, it helps us. If he runs to Wade, we learn Wade is still recruiting. If he runs, we learn he's afraid. Tactics. Mind. Not a drop of blood." Sawyer Maddox in a wheelchair was still more dangerous than most men on 2 working legs, because what made him terrifying had never been muscle or speed. It was his head, and that head was still intact. Rafe went quiet for a beat, then added, "One more thing. The East Side is applying pressure. A lot of people want your share, Sawyer. They smell blood. Let them smell it. The blood's already dry. I'm still here." "Boss," Rafe said, his voice softer, almost gentle by the standards of a man who had killed with his bare hands. "You need to know I'm not going anywhere." Sawyer didn't answer, but he gripped the phone a little tighter, and that was all Rafe needed to hear. Sawyer ended the call when Josie's footsteps sounded in the hallway. He slid the phone under his pillow, just in time. She walked in with a tray of pills and a cup of water, unaware that the man she was caring for in this stifling, clinical sanctuary had just issued his first order from a wheelchair in an underworld war she didn't even know existed. 2 wars were running in parallel. One in the hospital bed, where Sawyer Maddox fought a betraying body for every millimeter of movement. One out in the streets, where territory, loyalty, and power were being torn apart by vultures from every direction. Both demanded blood. Both demanded a patience Sawyer wasn't sure he had. And he didn't yet know a third war was about to knock on the hospital room door, in high heels, expensive perfume, and fake tears practiced to perfection in a mirror. She arrived on the afternoon of the 9th day, just as Sawyer had finished the most exhausting therapy session so far. Josie was helping him transfer from the wheelchair to the bed when the perfume entered the room before the woman did. Chanel. Expensive. Familiar enough that Sawyer's body went rigid at once. Camille Ashworth stood in the hospital doorway as if she were stepping onto a red carpet. A designer dress clung to her figure. Her hair was curled to perfection. Her makeup was done just enough to make her look as though she had been crying, yet still beautiful. She had always been good at that, turning tears into a fashion accessory. "Sawyer." Camille's voice was silk, trembling lightly at the end of the sentence. Measured, calibrated. "I realize I was wrong. I panicked. I was scared. Seeing you lying there, not knowing if you'd wake up, I couldn't handle it. But I've thought it through. I want to take care of you. I want to fix everything." Josie stepped back, watching. She didn't know who this woman was, but she knew the scent of a lie. She had smelled it for 4 years living with Troy Brennan. Every time he apologized after hitting her, every time he promised to change and then raised his hand again, lies had their own scent. Sweet, suspiciously perfect. And the woman standing in the doorway radiated it. Sawyer looked at Camille, not the look of a man gazing at a former lover. The look of someone who had been betrayed enough times to recognize when a snake returned, only because the old den was still warm. "You left while I was in a coma," he said, his voice flat. "You emptied the penthouse. drained the joint accounts, terminated our engagement before I opened my eyes. And now you're standing here, pretty dress, pretty tears, telling me you want to fix things." He tilted his head slightly. "What do you really want, Camille?" A tear slid down Camille's cheek. Perfect. A single drop on the left side, rolling slowly over foundation without smudging her mascara. A flawless performance. If Sawyer hadn't known her so well, he might have believed it. "I want you to get better. I want to be by your side." "How?" "By filing for guardianship over my assets and medical decisions." Camille froze, for a fraction of a second, long enough for Sawyer to know he was right. Rafe had warned him that morning. Camille's lawyer had been petitioning the court, arguing that Sawyer had suffered brain trauma and wasn't mentally competent to manage his affairs. If the court agreed, Camille would control everything. Money, property, even medical decisions. She could choose which hospital, which doctor, which therapy. She could lock him in a nursing home and throw away the key. "Who told you?" Camille asked, the mask slipping as quickly as silk sliding from a shoulder. "Doesn't matter. What matters is you're standing here saying you want to care for me, while your lawyer is telling a judge I'm unstable and incapable. You don't understand. It's to protect you. You're being taken advantage of. Can't you see that? People are circling you for money, for power, and you're lying here with no one to protect you." "People," Sawyer repeated. "Who exactly are people?" Camille's eyes flicked toward Josie. Sharp, quick, like a blade slicing through butter. "Who are you?" Camille asked, her voice shifting from silk to steel in a single breath. Josie answered calmly. "I'm the caregiver assigned by the hospital to Mr. Maddox." "Caregiver." Camille let her gaze travel over Josie from head to toe, the plain clothes, the worn sneakers, the hastily tied hair, the faint bruise on her wrist. Camille's smile thinned to something razor-sharp. "More like hired help." "I'm the one who stayed when you ran," Josie said. Not loud, not angry, simply stating a fact in a steady tone that landed harder than a slap. The room fell silent. Sawyer watched the two women facing each other across 3 meters of sterile air, one wrapped in designer fabric and Chanel, the other in a caregiver's uniform and old scars, and he knew who was telling the truth and who was performing. "Camille," he said finally, "get out. Your lawyer can speak to mine. You and I have nothing left to discuss." Camille looked at him. Something flickered in her eyes, not pain, closer to restrained fury. She gave a small nod, turned, and walked toward the door. But as she passed Josie, she paused, tilted her head, leaned close to the smaller woman as naturally as if offering a polite goodbye. Sawyer couldn't hear. He lay nearly 4 meters away, ears still ringing from exhaustion. But Josie heard, clearly, every word. "Do you know who he really is?" Camille whispered, warm breath against Josie's ear, thick with Chanel and venom. "He's a monster. You're washing and changing a monster. When you learn the truth, you'll run faster than I did." Then Camille pulled back, offered Sawyer a courteous smile from the doorway, and left. Her heels clicked against the hospital floor, fading down the corridor, steady and confident, like the ticking of a timed bomb. Josie stood still. Her face didn't change. Her hands didn't tremble. She returned to Sawyer's bedside, checked the IV line, adjusted his pillow, asked if he needed anything in a normal voice. Sawyer said no. She nodded and stepped out to retrieve medication. And only when the door closed behind her, only when she stood alone in the bleach-scented hallway, did Josie allow the word to touch her. Monster. She thought of the man in that hospital room, the man she had bathed, fed, pulled away from the IV line in the dark of night. The man whose voice turned cold and razor-sharp when he spoke on the phone to someone she didn't know, using language she didn't fully understand. Territory. Handling. Warning. Camille was a liar. Josie knew that as surely as she knew the scar on her own arm. But the best liars were the ones who mixed truth into their lies. And the word monster clung to Josie Brennan's mind, the way disinfectant clung to hospital walls. It couldn't be washed away. It couldn't be aired out. It could only be lived with. And it would begin to take root faster than she imagined. Wade's 72-hour deadline had 26 hours left when Attorney Bowen arrived at the hospital. He was the kind of lawyer Sawyer had paid for 10 years precisely so he would never have to meet him under circumstances like this. Gray suit, leather briefcase, silver-rimmed glasses, and the ability to break anything down into 2 columns of advantage and loss, without letting emotion touch a single number. "The situation is very clear," Bowen said, opening his case and placing 2 folders on the table beside the bed. "If you sign the transfer agreement to Wade, you lose all operational control for 18 months. On paper, it's temporary, but in reality, once Wade takes over, you'll never get it back. He'll restructure everything, replace your loyal people with his, and when the 18 months end, you'll be handed back an empty shell." Sawyer listened without expression. "If I don't sign, Wade will take it anyway. He already has Dutton. He has a few mid-level men who've defected. He's controlling the West Warehouse. Not signing means open war, and you're fighting from a hospital bed." Bowen adjusted his glasses. "Frankly, both options are bad. Sign and you lose for certain. Don't sign and you might lose more, but you leave yourself room to maneuver." "Room to maneuver," Sawyer repeated, looking down at his motionless legs beneath the hospital blanket. "Room to maneuver for a man who couldn't even turn in bed without help." Bowen left at 10 in the morning. Sawyer sat in his wheelchair by the window for the rest of the day, staring at the parking lot below, saying nothing. Josie didn't push him to talk. She brought lunch. He didn't eat. She brought medication. He took it. She brought water. He held the glass but didn't raise it to his mouth. She knew that posture. The posture of someone standing at a crossroads where both roads led off a cliff, and they had to choose which direction to fall. At 4 in the afternoon, Josie pulled a chair beside him. She didn't ask what was happening. Didn't ask if he was all right. She simply said, in the same tone she might have used to comment on the weather, "I don't know what decision you're being forced to make. I don't need the details, but I know the look of someone being pushed to choose between 2 things that were never really theirs." Sawyer looked at her. "My ex-husband always gave me 2 choices," Josie said, her eyes on the window. "Stay silent or get hit. Stay or lose my child. Both choices belong to him, not to me. He only gave me the illusion that I was deciding." She turned to him. "So if someone is offering you 2 options and both benefit them, maybe the real answer isn't inside either one." Silence settled between them. Sawyer studied her, the thin woman with the scar along her arm and eyes that had learned the nature of power from the crushed side of it. She didn't know about the Mafia, didn't know about territories, lieutenants, warehouses, underground wars, but she knew what it meant to be cornered by someone stronger, and she knew what it meant to refuse to kneel. "If you sign, you lose," Josie said. "If you don't, you might lose more. But at least you lose as someone who chose, and that's something no one can take unless you hand it to them." She stood and nudged the glass of water toward him. "Drink. You need water no matter what you're deciding." Then she left the room, leaving him alone with his thoughts. Sawyer sat there until evening. Until the hospital shifted into night lighting, the hall's empty, monitors beeping steadily from other rooms. This wasn't a tactical decision, not a calculation like Bowen's 2 columns on paper. This was about what kind of man he intended to be. Kneel before his brother, accept the role of a cripple granted mercy, sign away 15 years of blood and bone in exchange for counterfeit safety, or stand upright, if only in will, if only from a wheelchair, and tell the world that Sawyer Maddox chose his own way, even if that way might kill him. 11:47 at night. Sawyer picked up the phone. Dialed Wade. 2 rings. "Have you made up your mind?" Wade's voice came through, calm, confident, the voice of a man who believed he already knew the answer. "I have," Sawyer said. "I'm not signing. My territory is still mine. Do whatever you think you need to." Silence stretched 5 seconds. 10. Sawyer counted his heartbeat. Steady, slow, surprisingly calm. "You've always been stubborn," Wade said at last. Not angry, almost regretful. "Good luck." The line went dead. Sawyer exhaled. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from adrenaline draining out of him after a decision that couldn't be taken back. 2 minutes later, the phone vibrated. Rafe. 3 messages just came in. "Boss, all 3 senior lieutenants confirmed. They're still standing with you." Sawyer looked out the window. Chicago stretched below, lights blinking in the dark like a million watching eyes, and he smiled. The first smile since waking in a hospital bed where he had fought his darkest battles. Not wide, not warm, just a small curve at the corner of his mouth. But it was real, and it was his. Freedom. He had chosen freedom. But freedom also meant no safety net, no brother behind him, no protective contract. Just a paralyzed boss, a caregiver with scars, and 3 loyal men against an entire city. And Sawyer didn't yet understand that the most dangerous force in the coming war wouldn't be Wade, not Camille, not the East Side rivals. It would be himself, trying to control the old world with a new body, and the price would be paid in the blood of the only person still standing beside him. It happened on the evening of the 12th day. When Josie returned to the room earlier than expected because she had forgotten the medication tray on the table beside Sawyer's bed, she pushed the door open softly without knocking, thinking he was asleep. He wasn't. He was sitting in his wheelchair by the window, phone pressed to his ear, and the sound of his voice froze her hand on the doorknob. It wasn't the voice of the man she bathed every morning, not the tired, strained, enduring voice. This was different, cold, measured. Each word set down like a bullet being slid into a magazine. The West Territory doesn't get touched until I give the order. Tell Hollins that if he wants to handle it his own way, he'll be handled first. That's not a warning, Rafe. That's a notice. Silence. Then, good. Report back in the morning. He ended the call. Josie stood at the door, fingers still wrapped around the handle, feet rooted to the floor. Territory. Handle. Warning. Notice. The words spun through her mind like shards of glass, slicing through every assumption she had built about the man in the wheelchair. Sawyer turned his head and saw her. For a fraction of a second his eyes shifted, from ice to recognition to something dangerously close to fear. Not fear of Josie. Fear of what she had just heard. Josie. I forgot the medication tray, she said, her voice so normal they both knew it wasn't. She stepped inside, picked up the tray, and walked out without looking back. In the staff room she sat down, unlocked her phone, and typed 2 words into Google. Sawyer Maddox. The results appeared in less than a second. And Josie Brennan's world split clean down the middle. Alleged leader of the South Chicago crime organization. Sawyer Maddox, age 36, suspected of operating an illegal network stretching from the south side to the western suburbs. Federal court fails to convict Maddox for the 3rd time due to lack of direct evidence. Photos. Sawyer Maddox in a black suit stepping out of a federal courthouse. Face cold, eyes sharp, lawyers and bodyguards flanking him. Handsome, dangerous, power radiating from every step like heat rising from asphalt in July. The man in those photographs and the man she bathed each morning, spoon-fed, pulled back from an IV line in the dark, were the same person. And she hadn't known. Camille had known. The word monster that Camille had whispered in her ear hadn't been a lie. It was the only truth that woman had spoken. Josie closed her phone, opened it again. Read more. Each article stripped another layer of paint from the picture she thought she understood. Money laundering, protection rackets, territorial control, organized violence. No convictions, no direct evidence, but his name appeared often enough, in enough reports and court transcripts and witness statements, for Josie to understand. He wasn't innocent. He was simply too smart to be caught. She set the phone down, looked at her hands, the same hands that had bathed him, stretched his muscles, wiped sweat from his forehead after therapy, the same hands that had touched the body of a mafia boss without knowing it. 20 minutes later, she pushed open Sawyer's door. No knock. This time she hadn't forgotten anything. She had come because she needed answers. Sawyer looked at her and knew. One look at her eyes and he knew. "What are you?" Josie asked. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was hard as cooled steel. "Tell me, with your mouth, not Google." Sawyer was silent for 3 breaths. He could lie. He could say he was framed. He could say the media exaggerated. He had lied his whole life to police, to courts, to federal agents. But looking into the eyes of Josie Brennan, the woman who had pulled his hand from the IV line, who had seen his darkness before knowing how deep it ran, he couldn't lie. "I'm what you think I am," he said. No apology, no excuse, just admission. "I ran the South Chicago organization for 15 years. I've done things you'd despise if you knew the details. I'm not a good man." Silence. "But I'm also the man you saved. The one who wanted to die that night and you pulled back. Both are me. I don't know how to separate them." Josie looked at him. There were no tears in her eyes. Only something colder. The ruthless clarity of someone who had been deceived too many times to cry over one more revelation. "I ran from a violent man," she said slowly, each word dropping like a stone into a deep well. "I carried my daughter into the night with blood on my face. I lost her, lost my home, lost everything. I came here thinking I was helping an ordinary patient, and instead I find out I've been bathing and feeding a man the entire city fears. It was a precise blow. Sawyer didn't dodge it, didn't argue. He sat there in the wheelchair and took each word like a punch, because he knew she was right, and any justification he offered would make him Troy, the man who hit her and apologized, hit her and apologized, until apologies became weapons. "I'm not asking you to stay," Sawyer said. "I don't have that right." Josie didn't answer. She turned and walked out, closing the door more gently than any door he had ever heard close. That gentleness hurt more than a slam. She didn't go back to a shelter. She went to the hospital parking lot, sat inside the old car the hospital loaned her, locked the doors, and opened her phone. Phoebe's picture, brown curls, big eyes, purple crayon drawing held up proudly. Josie stared at her daughter and thought about Troy Brennan, police officer, clean uniform, easy smile. Neighbors calling him Officer Brennan with respect. Friends saying he was a good man, and behind closed doors he used fists instead of words, knives instead of reason, power instead of love, the mask of a good man hiding a monster. Then she thought about Sawyer. Mafia. Criminal. The entire city knew he was dangerous. No mask. No disguise. A monster in daylight. But that monster hadn't lied when she asked him directly. That monster hadn't apologized. Hadn't offered excuses. Hadn't said, "I'll change the way Troy had said 1,000 times. That monster had only said, "Both are me." Troy was a cop pretending to be good, hiding the monster inside. Sawyer was Mafia pretending to be nothing else. What did the mask of monster hide? Josie didn't know. Not yet. But she knew one thing. Troy had never given her a choice. Sawyer had just said, "I'm not asking you to stay." He had given her the right to walk away. And in 4 years, Troy had never given her that. 3 hours. Josie sat in the car looking at Phoebe's picture. Thinking, weighing, asking herself who she would be if she walked back into that room. Then she opened the car door, stepped out, crossed the parking lot, through the hospital lobby, down the bleach-scented corridor. She pushed open Sawyer's door. He was still there. Wheelchair by the window, eyes on the night. He didn't turn when the door opened, as if he had prepared for her not returning and was learning to accept it. "I'm staying," Josie said. Sawyer turned. For the first time since she had met him, his eyes weren't cold or sharp. They were open, unshielded. "Not because I forgive your past," she continued. "I don't. I'm staying because I believe you're trying to change. Because the man who wanted to die that night, and the man who told me the truth just now, are also you. But if you prove me wrong, if I see even a sign that I'm repeating my old mistake, I'll disappear, and you'll never find me." Sawyer nodded slowly. "Fair." Josie didn't smile, didn't reach for his hand. She set the medication tray on the table, checked the IV line, and asked if he needed anything before sleep. Normal, routine, as if nothing had shifted. But everything had shifted, because Josie Brennan wasn't afraid of monsters. She was afraid of being deceived by monsters disguised as good men. She had already lived that story once. The long scar along her left arm was proof, and she would never allow it to happen again. The bad news arrived on the morning of the 15th day, right in the middle of Sawyer's therapy session with Dr. Pham. The phone vibrated beneath his pillow. He looked at Josie. Josie looked back. They both knew that phone wasn't for calling doctors. Since the night of their confrontation, Josie hadn't asked about the calls. She knew who he was. She had chosen to stay. But she had drawn a clear line. His mafia life wasn't her business, and she didn't want the details. Sawyer respected that. He waited until Josie stepped out of the room, before calling Rafe back. The news hit like a fist to the gut. Wade had taken the West Warehouse, not gradually, completely. The night before, Wade's men had walked straight in, changed the locks, placed guards, and pasted a new name over everything as if the territory had never belonged to Sawyer at all. "The West Warehouse is the primary distribution hub," Rafe said, his voice tight, frustration barely contained. "Lose it, and 3 southern districts lose supply. The men will start wondering what we actually still control." Sawyer gripped the phone until his knuckles blanched. The West Warehouse. He had built it from an abandoned structure 12 years ago. Brick by brick, contract by contract, relationship by relationship. He had poured more than money into that place. He had poured his reputation into it. and Wade had taken it in one night, as easily as picking up a coin from the sidewalk. "I suggest diplomacy," Rafe said carefully. "Wade's still your brother. If we open a channel, maybe we can negotiate a split. No loss of face. No blood. No." The word left Sawyer's mouth before he had time to think. Instinct. 15 years of instinct. When someone took from him, he didn't negotiate. He took it back. "Call Hollins and the West team. Assemble tonight. We go straight in, reclaim the warehouse, push Wade's men out. Fast. Clean." "Boss, I think we should." "Rafe, I'm not asking for advice. I'm giving an order." Silence on the line. Then, yes, one word, heavy as lead. Sawyer ended the call, and in that moment he felt alive again. Not alive in the way of therapy, of lifting 2 kilograms, of sitting upright for 10 seconds without support. Alive in the way of issuing commands, of controlling outcomes, of a city moving when he dialed a number. His voice was still sharp, his mind still fast. But there was one thing he failed to calculate. The map in his head was outdated. He hadn't been on the streets for nearly 3 weeks. He didn't know Wade had repositioned forces, didn't know the West Warehouse now had upgraded surveillance, didn't know 2 of the guards were former mercenaries Wade had hired from out of town. He commanded from a hospital bed using memory, and memory didn't update. The result came at 2 in the morning, not as a call. Rafe came in person. He entered the hospital room at 217A, coat soaked, his left arm wrapped in white bandage from wrist to elbow, blood seeping through the gauze like a dark red flower slowly blooming. Josie, asleep on the staff room sofa, heard the heavy footsteps in the hallway and ran out. She saw Rafe, saw the blood. The nurse in her activated instantly. "Sit down. Let me see it." Rafe glanced at her, then at Sawyer, and lowered himself into the chair beside the bed. Josie unwrapped the bandage. The bullet had grazed the left deltoid, cut deep into muscle, missed the bone but bled heavily. She disinfected, rewrapped, worked quickly and professionally, not asking why there was a gunshot wound in his shoulder. She didn't need to ask. She looked at Sawyer only once during the entire process. The look wasn't angry, wasn't disappointed. It simply said, "I warned you," Rafe reported briefly. Hollins's team had been ambushed as soon as they approached the warehouse. Wade had known in advance. Either there was another leak, or Wade had simply read the move too easily, because it was the move Sawyer had made for 15 years, and Wade had watched him long enough to memorize it. Rafe had taken the graze covering Hollins's retreat. 2 other men were worse. One broken collarbone, one stabbed in close combat. No one dead, but blood had been spilled, and that blood was on Sawyer's hands. "The battlefield has changed," Rafe said, not accusing, not angry, just tired and brutally honest. "You're not out there anymore. You don't see, hear, or smell the air before it explodes. You can't command the old way. Not because you're weak, because the battlefield won't wait for you." Sawyer didn't answer. He looked at the bandage on Rafe's shoulder, the dark bloom spreading through the white, and he saw more clearly than any session with Dr. Pham had ever shown him. He was fighting with an outdated version of himself in a world that had already shifted, and the price wasn't his to pay. Others were paying it for him. Josie asked Rafe if he needed the emergency room. He shook his head, stood, gave Sawyer a small nod, and walked out, his steps heavier than when he had arrived. Josie remained beside the bed, silent. Sawyer looked at her. "Say it. What did you learn?" she asked, not rhetorical. She genuinely wanted to know. "That I can't force everything back to what it was. That healing has its own timeline, and war needs a new shape." Josie nodded. She didn't say "I told you so," didn't say anything else. She adjusted his pillow, turned off the overhead light, switched on the lamp, and left. But that night, around 3 in the morning, Josie heard the soft roll of wheels in the hallway. She stepped out of the staff room and saw him at the far end of the dim corridor. By the window he favored, but his posture was different. Not straight-backed, not clenched jaw, his shoulders sagged, his head bowed, hands resting limp on his thighs. Not angry, not cold, not strong, just tired. Tired in the way she recognized because she had once been tired like that. The kind of tired that comes when you realize you've hurt the one person you need most through your own stubborn pride. Josie walked over, pulled up a chair, and sat beside him. She said nothing. "Rafe almost died because of a stupid order I gave," Sawyer said quietly. almost a whisper, as if speaking louder would make the truth cut deeper. The only one who stayed. From the beginning. Everyone else left. Camille left. Wade turned. Men defected. Rafe stayed. And I almost killed him with my ego. Josie didn't comfort him. Didn't say it wasn't his fault. Didn't promise everything would be fine. She simply sat there in the dark beside him. And for the first time in his life, Sawyer Maddox let someone see his fear without feeling threatened, not because she was safe, but because she understood. She knew what it meant to hurt the person you depended on most. She knew what it meant to lose control. She had lived inside that for 4 years. They sat in silence until the sky began to lighten. Then Josie stood, touched his shoulder once, brief and firm, and withdrew her hand. "Therapy starts at 7, she said. "Sleep for an hour." The next morning, Sawyer called Rafe. "From now on, every field decision is yours. Deployment, retreat, negotiation. You decide. I set overall strategy. You're my eyes, ears, and hands out there. Silence. Boss, are you sure?" "More sure than any decision I've ever made." For the first time in 36 years, Sawyer Maddox learned how to delegate, learned how to trust someone else to hold what he had once gripped with both hands. And it hurt more than the bullet in his spine, more than the paralysis in his legs, more than Camille walking away. Because letting go of control isn't losing power. It's admitting you're no longer the man you used to be, and accepting that without collapsing, that is what it truly means to stand up. That night, 3 days after Rafe was shot, Sawyer couldn't sleep. Not because of pain, not because of nightmares, because of silence. The kind of haunted silence that comes after the gunfire is gone and the blood has dried. When you lie in the dark listening to the steady beep of the monitor and wonder how many more mistakes you're allowed before the price becomes something you can't pay. He rolled himself into the hallway a little before 11, needing space larger than 4 walls, needing to see something other than ceiling tiles and IV tubing. And he saw her again. Josie sat at the far end of the corridor, her usual spot by the window that looked out over the parking lot. Phone in her hand, a pale blue glow on her face. That photo. The curly-haired little girl, the purple crayon. Every night, the same image, the same stare, the same fingertip sliding softly over the screen, like she was afraid the picture would fade if she didn't touch it. But tonight, something was different. Josie didn't wipe her eyes. She didn't put the phone away. She just sat there, staring at the photo, and she cried, soundless. Tears tracked down her cheeks, dropped onto her wrist, slid over the long scar on her left arm that she usually hid under long sleeves. But Sawyer had seen enough times to know it was there. Long and straight, not an accident, a knife. Sawyer rolled closer. The wheels whispered over the floor. Josie heard, wiped her face quickly, slipped the phone away, turned to him with that familiar smile, the "I'm fine" smile she'd been wearing for as long as he couldn't guess. "Do you need something?" she asked, her voice normal. "What do you need?" Sawyer asked back. Silence. The smile on Josie's face trembled once, and then fell away, gently, like the last leaf on a winter branch. "Who is the little girl in the photo, Josie?" She looked at him, for a long time, weighing. Then she unlocked her phone, turned the screen toward him, and Sawyer saw clearly for the first time. A little girl, 4 or 5 years old, brown curls, big round eyes like her mother's, grinning wide, holding up a scribbled purple drawing with both hands. The drawing was 2 stick figures, one big and one small, holding hands under a yellow sun. "My daughter," Josie said. "Phoebe, 5 years old." 2 words, "my daughter," and the world Sawyer thought he understood about Josie Brennan flipped upside down. "My ex-husband, Troy Brennan. A cop. 12th Precinct. People call him Officer Brennan with respect." Josie spoke slowly, each sentence laid down carefully, as if she were placing shards of broken glass on a table, sharp and dangerous but needing to be seen. "He beat me for 4 years. It started with slaps, then punches, then kicks, then throwing things. Every time it escalated, and every time his apologies got sweeter, until apologies and violence became the same thing inside my head." She lifted her left arm and pushed up her sleeve. The scar was there, running from near her wrist almost to her elbow, puckered skin pulled tight, whiter than the flesh around it. "The last time," she said, her voice flat as water before a storm. "He used a knife, right in the kitchen. Phoebe was sitting in her high chair eating yogurt. She saw everything. Sawyer felt something ignite in his chest. Not pity. Rage. The pure kind of rage he'd once used to build an empire. The kind of rage that had to become action, because if it didn't, it would burn him alive from the inside out. I picked up Phoebe and ran that night, Josie went on. Blood on my hands, on my daughter's clothes. I ran to Helen's house. She's the doctor I told you about, but I didn't tell you the whole truth. She paused and drew in a breath. Helen wasn't just a doctor. She was my foster mother. I was orphaned young, bounced through several homes. No one kept me long. Helen took me when I was 13. She was the only person in my life who treated me like her real child. She taught me to read medical books. She paid for nursing school. She went with me to court when I filed against Troy the first time. And she died, Sawyer said softly. Lung cancer. 6 months from diagnosis to goodbye. When she died, I lost my last roof. There was no one left. No family, no friends. Troy used his connections in the department and in the courts to win custody of Phoebe. My lawyer was free and inexperienced. His lawyer was paid for by the police union. I lost. Josie looked down at the photo on her phone. It's been 2 years since I've been allowed to see my child. 2 years. Phoebe's world was defined by vibrant purple crayons and the fear of a storm she couldn't outrun. She calls me Mama Joe because when she was little she couldn't pronounce Josie. Her voice cracked on the last word. Just a small fracture. Then she sealed it again immediately with a deep breath, with the habit of someone who has cried enough to know tears don't change anything. I'm not telling you so you'll pity me, she said, meeting Sawyer's eyes. I'm telling you because you asked, and because you told me the truth about who you are. I owe you the truth about who I am. Silence. Then Josie added, her voice smaller. I'm afraid you'll see me as weak once you know it all. Orphan. Beaten. Lost my child. Living in a shelter. Nothing. I have nothing. Sawyer reached toward her. Slowly. Carefully. Like he was touching something precious and fragile. Something he could break if he used too much force. His hand found hers and closed around it. Light, but steady. You're going to see your daughter again, he said. Not comfort. A declaration. You don't know how the system works, Josie said. The exhausted voice of someone who has slammed into the same concrete wall too many times. I know how to break the system, Sawyer answered. That used to be my job. Josie looked at him, looked into his eyes, searching for the signs of a lie, of an empty promise like Troy's, like I'll change that never changed. She didn't find them. She saw a man paralyzed from the waist down, stripped of everything, sitting in a wheelchair in a hospital hallway just before midnight, holding her hand and promising to help her get back the child the system had stolen. And she wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. They sat there, hand in hand, saying nothing more. Feeling rose between them like slow water, rising to ankles, to knees, to chests, but neither of them gave it a name. Not yet. There were too many scars between them to hurry and label this as anything. Then Josie pulled her hand free and stood. She looked at him one last time before turning away. Don't promise what you can't keep. I've never made an empty promise, Sawyer said. Josie walked away without looking back, but her steps were lighter than when she had sat down. And Sawyer watched her in the dark hospital hallway filled with the humming of distant monitors, his hand still warm where hers had been, and he knew 2 things. 1, he would keep that promise even if he had to use everything he had left to do it. 2, somewhere out there was a man in a police uniform, carrying the Brennan name, the man who had cut his wife's arm with a knife in front of their daughter, the man who had used the system to stole a child who found courage in purple drawings while the thunder roared. And that man, Sawyer didn't yet know, was already on his way. Not because he wanted Josie back, because he knew things about her Sawyer had never been told, and he was selling them to the highest bidder. He came on Wednesday afternoon, right in the middle of Josie helping Sawyer work the resistance bands in the therapy room on the 3rd floor. Josie heard the footsteps before she saw him. Heavy, even, confident. The kind of stride that belonged to a man used to wearing service boots and walking as if the ground itself answered to him. She went rigid, her whole body locked for 1/10 of a second. So fast, doctor. Fam didn't notice, but Sawyer did. Over the past 3 weeks he had learned how to read Josie Brennan. Every flicker of muscle in her face, every blink, every time she clenched her fist and forced herself to let it go. He had never seen her like this. Not angry, not sad, Afraid. Truly afraid. Troy Brennan stood in the doorway of the therapy room as if he owned it. 12th Precinct police uniform. Badge polished bright. Hair trimmed sharp. That friendly neighbor smile Josie had seen 1,000 times before it turned into a fist behind the front door. 34 years old. Taller than Sawyer had been when he could stand. Broad-shouldered. Pale blue eyes. The kind strangers found handsome but Josie knew were empty. Like porcelain doll eyes. Glossy on the surface with nothing behind them. "Josie," Troy said warmly, the voice he used in front of colleagues and judges and social workers, the Officer Brennan voice everyone trusted. "Heard you're taking care of this paralyzed mafia guy. Quite the career move." Josie didn't answer. Her lips pressed thin. She let go of the resistance band and her fingers trembled, and she hated herself for it. Hated that after 2 years away from him, after all those nights in a shelter telling herself she was stronger now, the sight of that uniform still sent her body back into fear mode like a beaten dog seeing the whip again. Dr. Pham looked from one to the other, felt the air shift, and quietly stepped out of the room. "Why are you here?" Josie asked. She kept her voice steady, but Sawyer heard the crack beneath it, small and deep, like the first fracture in a dam. Troy stepped inside, his eyes sweeping over Sawyer in the wheelchair with the clinical assessment of a cop sizing up a suspect, then back to Josie. "Just making sure you're all right. I heard you're in a complicated situation. A woman named Camille reached out. Said you're caring for a man who's being petitioned for guardianship. She's concerned." "I'm concerned. She's concerned," Josie repeated flatly. "Right. And she needs some information about you for court. Medical history, psychological records, past issues. I can help her. I know you better than anyone." That was when Sawyer understood. Camille had found Troy. 2 snakes meeting in the dark. Camille provided the target. Troy provided the ammunition. He would hand over Josie's past, the abuse reports, the psychological evaluations, every wound she had tried to bury, and Camille would weaponize it in court. He hadn't come to warn Josie. He had come to remind her that he could still reach into her life whenever he wanted. "Step out of this room." Sawyer's voice. Not loud, not shouted. Cold. The kind of cold that made Rafe understand someone was about to lose more than sleep. Troy turned to him with a patronizing smile, the kind reserved for the disabled. "I'm talking to my ex-wife, buddy. Family matter. She's not your wife. And this isn't family. It's intimidation. If you come near her again, this wheelchair won't stop me from dismantling your life." Troy laughed, but his eyes flickered once. Fast. Enough for Sawyer to know he had heard him. Enough for Troy to realize the man in the wheelchair wasn't just another patient. Troy was a cop. He knew the name Sawyer Maddox. He had read the reports, heard the stories about the Southside boss federal prosecutors couldn't touch. And that boss was looking at him with the kind of gaze that belonged to men who followed through. "All right." Troy raised his hands lightly, smile still in place, though his steps retreated faster than his words. "Just visiting. Josie, if you want to talk, you know my number." He turned and walked out. The sound of his boots faded down the hallway. Josie stood there, fists tight at her sides, spine straight, face blank, but Sawyer saw her knees tremble, almost imperceptibly. When Troy's footsteps were gone completely, Sawyer pulled out his phone, dialed Rafe. 3 sentences. "Troy Brennan, 12th Precinct. I want internal affairs looking at him before the weekend." He hung up. Josie looked at him. Her eyes were still wet, but there was something new in them. Not gratitude. Something closer to awareness. The strength she had once feared in him, the underworld power, had just turned toward protecting her. The same hands that built a criminal empire were now shielding her from a man in a legal uniform. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say anything. She picked up the resistance band and said, "You've got 3 sets left." That evening, after Sawyer was back in bed and the lights were off, Josie stepped into the hallway. She held her phone and dialed Troy. Not because she wanted him, because of Phoebe. He answered after 4 rings. "Josie. Changed your mind. Let me talk to Phoebe. 5 minutes. Just 5. Silence. Then that soft laugh, the same sweet voice she once loved before it became torture. "No. She's asleep. And you don't have visitation rights, Josie. You know that. 5 minutes. On the phone. She won't even..." No. The line went dead. Josie stood in the hallway staring at the dark screen. Then she went into the restroom, locked the door, slid down the wall onto the tile, and cried. Soundless, hands pressed over her mouth, shoulders shaking, tears slipping between her fingers onto the cold floor. 5 minutes later, she stood, washed her face, looked at herself in the mirror, eyes red but dry. She walked past Sawyer's room. He lay in the dark, eyes open, watching her pass. Her eyes were red, her voice steady. Therapy starts at 6 tomorrow. Dr. Pham wants to increase upper body intensity. All right, Sawyer said. Josie nodded and walked on. Sawyer pretended not to see the redness. Pretended not to hear the faucet running longer than usual. Pretended not to know she had called Troy and been refused. But he saw, he heard, he knew. And that night, when the hospital fell quiet, Sawyer picked up the phone and called Rafe again. Rafe, about Troy Brennan. I need more than internal affairs. What do you need? Everything. Internal complaints, colleague reports, suppressed domestic violence calls, neighbor statements, photos, documents, anything the system buried to protect a cop who beats his wife. How does this tie to Camille's guardianship case? It doesn't. This is something else. Silence. More important, Rafe didn't ask again. He had followed Sawyer Maddox long enough to know when the boss said more important, it wasn't business. It wasn't territory. It wasn't money. It was personal. And Sawyer Maddox fighting for something personal was 10 times more dangerous than Sawyer fighting for power. Troy Brennan didn't know. He went home that night, took off his uniform, opened a beer, turned on the television, and fell asleep in the house where Josie once bled onto the kitchen floor. He didn't know he had walked into a hospital room and woken something he should have left sleeping. The beast in the cage. And that beast, even paralyzed, even seated in a wheelchair, even unable to stand and walk, still had claws sharp enough to tear apart the life of a wife-beating cop from inside the very system that man believed would always protect him. Attorney Bowen came for the second time on Monday morning of the 4th week, and this time he didn't bring 2 neat folders. He brought an overstuffed briefcase and the face of a man about to deliver news no one wanted to hear. The situation has changed, Bowen said, closing the door and pulling up a chair across from Sawyer. Josie stood by the window, arms folded, the way she had during every previous meeting with the lawyer. She was used to bad news about the guardianship case. She wasn't used to the bad news being about her. Camille isn't just pursuing guardianship anymore, Bowen said as he opened his case and withdrew a thick file, placing it on the table. She hired a private investigator to follow Miss Brennan, and he's been thorough. Josie lowered her arms. Bowen opened the file. Photographs. Josie stepping out of the shelter on South Halsted, face exhausted, a bag over her shoulder, captured from across the street with a long lens. Josie walking to the bus stop at 5 in the morning. Josie sitting alone in the diner where she used to work night shifts, eating the cheapest plate on the menu. Josie standing outside the hospital gates on her first day caring for Sawyer, holding her caregiver's bag, looking up at the building like someone about to walk into battle. Each image was a fragment of her life, torn free and laid out for strangers to inspect. But the photos weren't the worst part. They obtained Miss Brennan's psychological records from the free clinic on West Madison, Bowen continued, his tone careful but direct. Diagnosis: post-traumatic stress disorder related to prolonged domestic abuse. Therapist notes indicate symptoms of PTSD, chronic insomnia, exaggerated startle response to loud noises, and recurring depressive episodes. Josie didn't move. Her face didn't change. But Sawyer saw her swallow once, hard, like she was swallowing glass. In addition, Bowen said, they have her temporary housing assistance applications, free legal aid requests, shelter intake records, and, he paused, an audio recording. What recording? Sawyer asked. A phone call between Miss Brennan and Troy Brennan, in which she requests to speak with her daughter and is denied. In the recording, Miss Brennan cries. The hospital room went silent. Josie stared at the file on the table as if it were a coiled snake in her bed. Everything she had tried to bury, to outrun, to survive past, now lay printed on paper, captured by camera, preserved in audio, photos of her bruised and worn, reports labeling her psychologically damaged, assistance forms proving she was poor, her voice breaking as she begged to speak to her child, her entire being stripped bare, packaged into a dossier for another woman to weaponize in a courtroom. What will they use it for? Josie asked, her voice so calm, Sawyer knew it was held together by sheer force. To paint you as mentally unstable and manipulative, Bowen replied plainly. Camille will argue that Sawyer is being influenced by a psychologically compromised caregiver, that the relationship itself proves he lacks judgment, because a competent man wouldn't allow someone with this record to be so close to him. Josie gave a small nod. Not agreement. The nod of someone who has just been hit in the stomach and refuses to bend over. Bowen looked at Sawyer, waiting for instruction. Sawyer looked at Josie. She didn't look back. Her eyes were fixed on the file, her hand trembling faintly at her side, and Sawyer understood what frightened her most. Not losing the case, losing his respect. That after seeing the photos, reading PTSD in black ink, hearing her cry on tape, he would look at her with pity, or worse, with the same look Troy used, the look that said, "You're fragile. You need me to control you. Give us the room," Sawyer said to Bowen. The lawyer nodded, stood, and left, closing the door. Silence settled. "Maybe I should leave," Josie said, still staring at the file, "before this costs you everything. I told you if I ever harmed you, I'd disappear. And this is me harming you. My past is becoming a weapon against you. Josie, look at it." She pointed at the file. "Photos of me leaving a shelter, a PTSD diagnosis, aid applications, a recording of me crying. Is that what you want beside you in court? Is that what you want a judge to see when deciding whether you're competent?" "I saw the file before you did," Sawyer said. Josie froze. "Bowen sent it to me this morning, before you came in. I read it. All of it. The photos, the reports, the recording." The silence stretched. "And do you know what I saw?" Sawyer said. His voice wasn't soft. It wasn't sweet. It was steady and unflinching. "I saw a woman beaten to broken bones who still stood up. A mother who lost her child and didn't give up. Someone who lived in a shelter and still chose to save other people. Someone diagnosed with PTSD who walked into a hospital room at midnight and pulled a dying man's hand away from an IV line." He held her gaze. "If that's what Camille Ashworth wants to use to destroy you, then she's dumber than I thought. Because everything in that file doesn't prove you're weak. It proves you're the strongest person I've ever met. And I've met a lot of people who call themselves strong." Josie said nothing. Her lips pressed tight. Her eyes reddened, but no tears fell, as if she was using every ounce of will to keep them inside. She had cried in front of too many people in her life, and none of them had ever said what Sawyer just said. She bit her lip. Nodded once. Then she turned and walked out, quick but not running, and Sawyer knew she was hiding tears because she always hid tears. She had learned during 4 years with Troy that crying in front of someone gave them a weapon, but she stayed. She didn't return to the shelter. She didn't disappear. She didn't run. 20 minutes later, she came back into the room, eyes dry, voice steady, a therapy schedule in her hand. "Dr. Pham wants to increase resistance band intensity next week. I think you're ready." Josie Brennan stayed. And that was all the answer Sawyer Maddox needed. The decision came on Thursday morning of the 6th week, when Sawyer finished reading Bowen's email informing him that Camille had filed an emergency motion requesting a second psychiatric evaluation, alleging that Dr. Langston was biased and that Josie had coached Sawyer before the assessment. The hearing was postponed another 6 weeks. 6 more weeks inside a glass cage. 6 more weeks for Camille to dig, to strike, to build her narrative piece by piece. Sawyer set his phone down and looked at Josie, preparing the equipment for the morning therapy session. He saw the scar on her arm when her sleeve slipped up as she reached for the resistance band. He saw the fatigue in her eyes and the refusal to bend, and he decided he wouldn't play defense anymore. "I need a phone," he told Rafe that afternoon. "Not one for calls, one for recording video. And I need Bowen here for an hour to review everything before I post it." Rafe studied him. "What are you going to do?" "Tell the truth, all of it. Let the world hear it." The video was filmed right there in the hospital room. No staging, no lighting adjustments, no prepared script. Just Sawyer Maddox sitting in his wheelchair, unshaven, hospital gown wrinkled, looking straight into the phone camera Rafe held, and speaking. He told them about the ambush, the bullet, the moment he woke and couldn't move his legs. He told them how Camille left before the anesthesia wore off, cleared out the penthouse, drained the joint accounts, filed to terminate the engagement, and vanished as if he had never existed. He spoke about her return, about the guardianship petition, once she realized there were still assets to control. He referenced financial records showing she had been siphoning money for 6 months before the shooting. He talked about the private investigator following Josie. He laid it out plainly. He didn't mention the mafia. He didn't mention territory or soldiers. He spoke as a paralyzed man abandoned and robbed, fighting to keep the right to decide his own life. And that was the truth. Not the whole truth, but the part the world needed to hear. Bowen reviewed the video 3 times, cut 2 segments that posed legal risk, and nodded. "If you're certain, once this goes up, you can't take it back." "I'm certain." The video went online at 8 Thursday night. By midnight, it had 500,000 views. By morning, it had doubled. Media outlets picked it up. Social media ignited. And the world split in 2. Those siding with Sawyer wrote that she left him paralyzed and came back for money, that she was a snake, that they hoped he crushed her in court. Those siding with Camille argued he was a crime boss, manipulating a caregiver, that she had done the right thing leaving, that no one sane would stay with a mafia figure, that the nurse was clearly exploiting a wealthy patient. But the worst part, the part Sawyer hadn't anticipated despite a lifetime of calculating outcomes, was Josie. The internet identified her in less than 12 hours. Her full name, old photographs, the address of the shelter on South Halsted. Someone posted court records from her divorce with Troy, including the domestic violence allegations he denied and the court dismissed for lack of evidence. Someone else reposted the photo of her leaving the shelter, the same one Camille's investigator had taken. Then the messages started. Josie opened her phone at 7 the next morning and read in silence while Sawyer watched her face change instantly, blood draining from her skin, lips going pale, fingers tightening around the phone until her knuckles whitened. She scrolled, read, scrolled again, didn't say a word. Sawyer reached for the device. "Let me see." She handed it over. He read messages calling her a parasite, clinging to a mafia boss for money, saying they hoped she'd be beaten to death like before, asking for her location so someone could teach her a lesson, insisting she didn't deserve custody, and that Troy should keep Phoebe until she died. Each line felt like a blow. Not to her, to him, because he had lit the match. He had posted the video. He had pulled her into the glare of public attention without calculating that the light would expose her too, and that the darkness of the internet didn't care about truth. "They posted the shelter address," Josie said quietly. "I can't go back there." Sawyer felt the ground fall away beneath wheels that hadn't touched ground in weeks. The shelter had been the only place she had. Now it was compromised. She wasn't safe there. She wasn't safe anywhere. "Come stay with me," he said. "Not romantic. Survival." The small apartment Rafe had rented for him ahead of discharge. 1 bedroom, 4th floor, modest but secure. Cameras, digital locks, Rafe downstairs. Josie understood what that meant. Not just moving in, crossing into a shared life. From caregiver living independently to living with her patient, her lover, the paralyzed mafia boss she had kissed the night before. Every boundary she had drawn was being erased. Not by her or Sawyer, but by a world that left her no other choice. "Okay," she said. That night in the apartment, Josie sat on the bed hugging a pillow, staring out at the glittering city below, beautiful and indifferent and dangerous, like the man in the wheelchair beside her. Sawyer didn't touch her, didn't take her hand. He simply sat there in the dark and said, "This is my fault. I posted the video. I pulled you into the storm." Josie looked at him and said it wasn't his fault, that the cruelty belonged to the people sending the messages and posting addresses, and believing they had the right to judge her life from behind a screen. Her voice was steady, but she held the pillow tighter. And for the first time, Sawyer understood that words weren't enough to protect her. He could say he loved her. He could promise safety, but he was in a wheelchair, legs unmoving, and outside was a world willing to hurt her for daring to stand beside him. Neither of them slept. They sat in the dark under the same roof for the first time. 2 scarred people bound not by silence but by it. And somewhere else, in a penthouse rented with stolen money, Camille Ashworth watched the same video on her laptop, not with rage, but with a smile. Public opinion divided meant she still had allies. Sawyer's video had given her exactly what she needed most: attention. She picked up her phone and called her mother. "Brenda Ashworth. Mom, I have a new plan." Because Camille Ashworth wasn't the type to accept defeat. She was simply shifting strategy, and the next one would be more ruthless than anything Sawyer and Josie could imagine. 3 in the morning. The phone rang in the darkness of the small apartment. Tearing through a sleep neither Sawyer nor Josie had truly managed. No one had slept deeply since the video went online. Josie woke first, the instinct of someone who had lived on alert for 4 years, always listening, always ready to run. She checked the screen. Unknown number. Chicago area code. She answered, listened. Her face changed. You need to hear this, she said, handing the phone to Sawyer. The voice on the other end belonged to a nurse from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Mr. Maddox, I'm calling regarding Miss Camille Ashworth. She was brought into the emergency department about an hour ago. Sleeping pill overdose. Her mother, Brenda Ashworth, found her unconscious in her bedroom. She's been treated and stabilized, but she's requesting to see you. Sawyer sat motionless in his wheelchair in the dark, the phone pressed to his ear. Camille overdosed. Camille hospitalized. Camille asking for him. And by dawn, the world that had split in two over his video would know. I understand, he said evenly. Thank you for informing me. He hung up. Silence settled between them. Josie sat on the bed, hugging a pillow, watching him. She didn't ask if Camille was all right. She didn't ask anything. She waited. Because she knew, with the instinct of someone who had lived with a manipulator for 4 years, that this wasn't tragedy. It was strategy. But she didn't say it out loud. Some lines feel cruel to cross when someone has just landed in a hospital bed. By morning, the news spread like wildfire. Headlines framed Camille as a victim of public humiliation, questioned whether Sawyer's video had pushed her too far. Public opinion pivoted almost overnight. Comments that had called her a snake vanished. A new wave rose, sharper and angrier, aimed straight at Sawyer and Josie. Accusations that he had driven her to suicide, that the nurse had destroyed a family, that they should be ashamed. Josie read the comments in silence, not on her own phone but on Sawyer's laptop. She scrolled and read and scrolled again, her face unreadable, until her movement slowed and finally stopped. Josie. She closed the laptop and looked at him. What he saw scared him more than anger would have. Not grief, calculation, the cold evaluation of someone considering leaving because it might be the only rational move left. I can't compete with your guilt, she said steadily. When Josie Brennan spoke with dry eyes and a level voice, she wasn't breaking. She was deciding. Every time she pulls a string, you move. The video, the guardianship, the investigator. Now this. Every escalation from her gets a response from you, and every response drags me further into a war I never chose. Maybe I should go. Not because I want to, because it's the only way she runs out of ammunition. No, Sawyer said, but not sharply, not commandingly. Calm. Calm enough to surprise her. I'm not going to the hospital. I'm not calling back. I'm not making a statement. I'm not moving. Silence stretched. She took those pills because she wanted me there, he continued. Wanted cameras catching me walking into her room. Wanted the narrative of regret and reconciliation. I'm not playing that part. What if she really wanted to die? Josie asked quietly, the question both of them had been avoiding. Then she needs a psychiatrist, Sawyer replied. Not me. He rolled closer. I choose you. I choose us. Camille Ashworth doesn't get to control my life anymore. Not with tears. Not with lawyers. Not with pills. Josie searched his face for hesitation, for the faintest trace of performance. She found none. 2 days later, Rafe called with something else. A recording. He had placed someone near Brenda Ashworth weeks earlier, knowing she was the weakest link in Camille's strategy. Brenda had phoned Camille's attorney 2 hours before the overdose. Her voice on the recording was composed, clinical, not remotely panicked. The dosage had been calculated. Enough for hospitalization, not enough for real danger. The hospital choice deliberate for media access. Camille needed to appear fragile but lucid enough for cameras. Sawyer listened and then set the phone down. She staged it, Josie said, not surprised, just tired in the way of someone who has been right about human nature too often. She staged it. Sawyer confirmed. This recording could destroy her. If I release it publicly, she's finished. Not just the case. Fraud, court manipulation, public deception. She loses everything. Silence lingered between them. Will you release it? Josie asked. Sawyer thought for a long time. Months ago, he would have burned her to the ground without hesitation. Months ago, he would have chosen annihilation. But he wasn't that man anymore. No, he said at last. I'll give it to Bowen. He'll submit it to the court under seal. The judge will see it. Her lawyers will know we have it. The motion will collapse. But I won't make it public. Why? Because I'm tired. I want this to end. I don't want to destroy her." Josie studied him, then said softly, "You've changed. The man I met would have set everything on fire. You taught me that letting go can be strength too," Sawyer said. And he realized it was true. Not strength like a clenched fist. Strength like an open hand. The kind that steps past a fallen enemy instead of crushing them. That night, in the small apartment, they sat by the window overlooking the city. Josie took his hand. He held hers. They didn't need to fill the silence. Sometimes silence between two people in love isn't emptiness. It's proof that presence is enough. But the hearing was coming in 2 weeks. And this time, under courtroom lights, before a judge and the press and a watching world, no one would be able to hide. Not Camille behind practiced tears. Not Sawyer behind a criminal past. Not Josie behind a PTSD diagnosis. Everything would stand exposed. And only the naked, unpolished truth would decide who walked away free. Courtroom 7, the Dirksen Federal Building, downtown Chicago. 8:30 on a Monday morning. The hallway had been crowded since 7 with reporters, cameras, supporters holding signs, curious onlookers treating it like theater, and lawyers from both sides moving in and out with files thick as bricks. Sawyer Maddox wheeled himself through the main doors. He didn't let anyone push him. Both hands gripping the rims, shoulder muscles taut beneath the white shirt Josie had ironed that morning. Back straight, face unreadable, eyes fixed ahead. Josie walked beside him. She didn't hold his hand. She didn't touch the chair. She wore a dark blue blouse and tailored pants, hair pulled back neatly, the scar on her left arm visible because today she wasn't wearing long sleeves. For the first time, she wasn't hiding it. Attorney Bowen met them at the courtroom entrance, nodded once, said little. He had prepared everything the week before. Documents, witnesses, strategy, and the ace Camille didn't know was sitting inside his black leather briefcase. Across the aisle, Camille Ashworth was already seated. White suit, hair down, makeup light, the carefully crafted look of someone recently ill but brave enough to appear. Her hands rested on the table, trembling slightly, and Sawyer no longer cared whether that tremor was real or rehearsed. Foundation didn't fully conceal the shadows beneath her eyes. Lack of sleep, perhaps. Medication still lingering. Or a long night practicing the expression of wounded resilience in the mirror. Judge Whitmore entered. The courtroom rose and sat. She was in her 60s, sharp-eyed, thin-lipped, her gavel strike crisp as a gunshot. "We are here to review the petition for financial and medical guardianship filed by the petitioner, Camille Ashworth, against the respondent, Sawyer Maddox. Counsel for the petitioner, proceed." Camille's attorney stood, tall, silver-haired, voice deep and expensive, every sentence measured like it cost money. He painted the narrative Camille had constructed for months. Sawyer Maddox, severely injured, cognitively impaired, pathologically dependent on his caregiver, incapable of managing assets or medical decisions, in need of a guardian, and who better than the devoted fiancé who had returned despite pain and humiliation to care for him? Bowen rose, calm, methodical, structured. First, Dr. Langston's report. He read the conclusions line by line, fully competent, no cognitive impairment, no evidence of pathological dependency. Opposing counsel objected, alleging bias. Judge Whitmore dismissed it. Dr. Langston is a court-appointed expert. Her findings stand. Next came witnesses. Dr. Pham confirmed Sawyer was lucid, cooperative, progressing steadily. The head nurse testified that he made his own medical decisions consistently, without signs of manipulation. Then Bowen produced the ace. "Your Honor, we would like to submit financial evidence." He opened the black briefcase and placed a thick stack of documents on the table. In the 6 months preceding the attack that left my client paralyzed, the petitioner transferred over $200,000 from joint accounts into a personal account solely in her name. The transfers were divided into smaller sums, concealed within routine expenditures. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The gavel struck once. Additionally, Bowen continued evenly, "We have private digital logs and emails sent to an associate dated 2 weeks before the attack, discussing a withdrawal strategy and personal asset protection. The content indicates the petitioner intended to leave my client prior to the incident." Opposing counsel shot to his feet. "Objection." Source of this evidence. Bowen's expression didn't change. My client has extensive connections. Judge Whitmore reviewed the documents, her gaze moving deliberately. The financial records are legitimate bank documentation. The electronic messages were obtained within permissible bounds. They are admitted. Across the room, Camille's color drained. The tremor in her hands was no longer performance. Her attorney leaned in to whisper, but she wasn't listening. She stared at Sawyer, and in her eyes he saw the moment recognition dawned. The war had been lost long before she realized it. Then Camille took the stand. She performed, tears at the right beats, voice breaking on cue. I loved him. I was afraid. I made mistakes, but I came back because I still love him. Bowen waited, then rose for cross-examination. Miss Ashworth, you claim love. How do you explain the $200,000 transferred into your personal account? Household expenses. Household expenses in cash. No receipts. Divided to avoid detection. Silence. And this message to your attorney 2 weeks prior, stating you needed to finalize your exit strategy and secure personal assets. Camille looked down, then up, then toward her lawyer. He didn't meet her eyes. Miss Ashworth, Judge Whitmore prompted. And Camille Ashworth collapsed. Not theatrically, not staged. The mask fell. The rehearsed tears vanished. What remained was pale skin, tight lips, eyes burning red, and a voice shaking with something real. Fine. Yes, I was going to leave. Accident or not. He was cold, married to work. I was lonely. I couldn't take it anymore. The shooting just made it easier. I didn't have to pretend heartbreak. I could just go. The courtroom went still. No whispers, no rustling. Only the scratch of a reporter's pen and the steady hum of cameras. Judge Whitmore regarded her for 3 long seconds, then struck the gavel. The petition for guardianship is denied. The court finds the petitioner lacked legal basis and provided misleading information. The matter is referred to the prosecutor for review of potential financial fraud and court deception. The gavel fell one final time. Outside, Chicago's air was cold, wind sweeping across the stone steps. Sawyer rolled through the doors with Josie beside him and Bowen behind. Reporters surged, but Rafe blocked them, a wall of loyalty. Then Sawyer heard her voice one last time. Sawyer. Camille stood several feet away. No pristine white suit now, coat drawn tight, eyes swollen, no tears, no mask. For the first time, Sawyer saw Camille Ashworth unfiltered, not curated, just a tired woman who had lost. Take care of him, she said to Josie. Better than I ever did. Then she turned and walked away, shoulders trembling, heels clicking against stone until the sound dissolved into the city. Josie watched her go, then looked at Sawyer. Are you okay? I will be, he said. In time. He looked up at the gray Chicago sky. Cold. Open. Camille was gone. The guardianship battle was over. But one question remained lodged in his back, literally and figuratively. The bullet. Who had put it there? And the answer was closer than he thought. Rafe called on Tuesday morning, 1 week after the hearing, with the tone Sawyer recognized instantly, the tone of a mission completed, of a long investigation finally closed. Boss, it's done. I have the answer. Sawyer sat in his wheelchair in the small apartment while Josie made porridge in the kitchen, the soft boil of the pot slipping through the half-open door. He rolled out onto the balcony, slid the glass door shut, and listened. Rafe spoke concisely, clearly, without a wasted word, the kind of report they had shared for 15 years. Dutton, the traitor Sawyer had ordered isolated back in the second week. He had arranged the ambush. Not alone, he didn't have that kind of reach, but he had been the bridge. Dutton provided the information, the route, the timing, the number of guards, Sawyer's exact position that night, and the recipient wasn't Wade. It was the East Side rival group, the one that had been applying pressure for months before the shooting, the one Rafe had warned about. They wanted Sawyer out of the game. Dutton wanted promotion. Greed met opportunity, and the bullet in Sawyer's back was the result of their handshake. And Wade? Sawyer asked. That question had lived in his chest for months, heavier than the bullet, deeper than the spinal injury. His own brother. Blood. Since the first night Rafe had said Wade's response time was too fast, the doubt had clung to him like antiseptic to hospital walls. Wade wasn't behind the shooting, Rafe said. I went all the way down. No link between him and the East Side before the ambush. No evidence he knew in advance. Silence. But, Rafe continued, once you were in the hospital, Wade moved within hours. He didn't shoot you. He just saw you fall and stepped into the space. Opportunistic, not murderous. Wade Maddox hadn't put the knife in his brother's back. He'd just seen the knife already there and twisted it once for advantage. Sawyer closed his eyes and exhaled. Something inside him loosened. Not relief, acceptance. His brother hadn't wanted him dead. But his brother hadn't saved him either, and the gray space between those two truths was exactly where their relationship had always lived. That afternoon, Sawyer called Wade for the first time since the night he'd said, "I won't sign," and Wade had replied, "Good luck." 4 months of silence between brothers. Wade answered on the second ring and said nothing. He waited. "Come to my apartment," Sawyer said. "This afternoon." Silence. Then, "All right." Wade arrived at 4. The suit was still expensive, the hair still precise, but his eyes were different. Sawyer saw it immediately. Tired. Not from lack of sleep. The kind of tired that comes from running too long toward a finish line no one's waiting at. And beneath the frost Wade Maddox had worn for 42 years, there was something close to regret. Close. Not quite. Men in their family didn't regret. They simply recognized mistakes and didn't know what to do with the knowledge. They sat across from each other in the small living room, Sawyer in his wheelchair, Wade on the sofa. No tea, no polite health inquiries. "You didn't shoot me," Sawyer said. "Not a question." Wade held his gaze. "No. But you used the bullet." "Yes." No defense, no explanation. No, it was business. Just, yes. 2 letters carrying more truth than Wade had offered in a lifetime. Silence stretched while Chicago moved beyond the windows. Indifferent. "I don't want the territory back," Sawyer said. Wade frowned. That he hadn't expected. "I'm building something else," Sawyer continued. "It has nothing to do with South or North or anything we used to divide." Wade looked at him with an expression Sawyer had never seen on his brother's face. Surprise. Real surprise. "You were always the smarter one," Wade said quietly. "I just never admitted it." Sawyer didn't answer. Wade stood, buttoned his coat, walked to the door, paused without turning around. "If you need anything," he began, then stopped. "Don't call." Silence. "But if you really need it." "I know," Sawyer said. Wade nodded and left, closing the door gently. No embrace, no handshake, no cinematic reconciliation. Just 2 brothers acknowledging the truth and accepting that whatever blood meant between them would always be crooked and cracked. Never the perfect family portrait. But it existed, and sometimes that was enough. That weekend, a letter arrived. White envelope, London postmark, handwriting Sawyer recognized immediately. Slanted and elegant. The same script Camille had once used for birthday cards and shopping lists, and now for confession. He read it alone on the balcony while Josie showered. Camille wrote everything. The affair that had lasted a year before the shooting. The systematic withdrawals. The exit plan completed before the bullet ever came. The staged overdose. Dosage calculated precisely. Her mother playing the discoverer. Northwestern chosen for media presence. All of it. No excuses. No rehearsed apology. Just black ink on white paper. At the end, she wrote, "I never knew how to love. I only knew how to possess. Control. Own. I called that love because I didn't know what else to call it. Watching you and Josie, I understand what real love looks like. It isn't pretty. It isn't perfect. But it's real. And real is what I never gave you." Sawyer folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. He didn't reread it. Josie stepped out of the bathroom, hair wet, bare feet against the floor, scar visible in the afternoon light. "What is it?" she asked. "A letter from Camille, from London." "What did she say?" Sawyer looked at her. This woman with damp hair and an old t-shirt. The woman who had taught him to open his hand instead of clench it, to stand through will when his legs wouldn't move, to love with truth instead of control. "It doesn't matter," he said. "She's not our story anymore." Josie nodded and didn't press. Sawyer looked out over the city and felt the cords that had bound him for months. Camille, Wade, the bullet, the guardianship, the courtroom, fall away one by one like autumn leaves across Chicago pavement. 2 old relationships had found their closure. A brother, a fiancé, both gone, both finished speaking. But one battle remained, not his, Josie's. And it wasn't named Camille or Wade or Bullet. It was named Phoebe, 5 years old. The child whose unfiltered joy, and favorite violet hues were the only things Josie had lived for. Sawyer waited until evening, after dinner, when Josie was sitting on the sofa folding clothes, her eyes drifting now and then toward the phone lying face down on the table, where Phoebe's photograph rested in the gallery as it did every night, waiting for her to open it and look when she thought no one was watching. He rolled his chair beside her. He placed a thick file across his lap. "I need you to see this," he said. Josie looked at the file, then at Sawyer. Her eyes narrowed, the instinct of someone who had received too much bad news delivered in folders like that. "What is it?" "Evidence. About Troy Brennan." She set the shirt she was folding aside. Her hands paused in midair, then lowered slowly to her thighs. "What kind of evidence?" Sawyer opened the file. Inside were copies of 4 internal complaints from Troy's fellow officers at the 12th Precinct, all buried, all documenting excessive force while on duty. A report from Internal Affairs. The investigation opened after the 3-sentence phone call Sawyer made the day Troy appeared at the hospital, confirming that Troy Brennan was under review for abuse of authority and domestic violence. Statements from 3 former neighbors at the address where Josie and Troy had once lived, each describing shouting, breaking glass, and one incident of Josie running out the door with blood on her face. Photographs of Josie's injuries from an old hospital record. Images she hadn't known still existed in the system, documenting fractured ribs, a hairline skull fracture, and a long laceration down her left arm caused by a sharp object. Josie read, page by page, slowly. Her face didn't change, but her hands trembled lightly along the edges of the paper, and Sawyer knew she was staring at 4 years of hell, printed into the dry administrative language of the legal system. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked, her voice low. "Since the night you told me about Phoebe." Silence. Josie looked up. "That night in the hallway, when I held your hand and told you that you would see your daughter again," Sawyer said. "You told me not to promise what I couldn't keep. I told you I don't make empty promises." He held her gaze. "I kept it." Josie looked at the file, at him, then back at the file, and for the first time since Sawyer had known her, Josie Brennan had no words. Not because there was nothing to say, because there was too much. Because the man in the wheelchair had quietly, over weeks, used the network he built in the underworld to dig into the very system that had betrayed her, to uncover the evidence her free legal aid attorney had never had the power to find, and place it on her lap with the calm of a man who had just paid a debt. Attorney Bowen filed the motion to reopen custody the following week. The evidence was overwhelming. The Internal Affairs file, combined with neighbor testimony, injury photographs, and the ongoing investigation, formed a picture no judge could ignore. Troy Brennan was a systematic abuser, shielded by the system, and had used his badge to take a child from her mother. Troy was suspended 2 days before the hearing. His badge confiscated, his gun confiscated, his uniform confiscated. And when he entered the courtroom on Wednesday morning, he wore a wrinkled white shirt and old slacks, looking smaller, ordinary, like so many men who beat their wives once dragged into the light, common. The hearing was short. The evidence spoke. Injury photographs projected onto the screen. Neighbor statements read aloud. Internal Affairs reports submitted to the judge. Troy sat silent, face drained of color, hands gripping the edge of the table, staring straight ahead like a man watching his own life collapse on a screen he couldn't turn off. His attorney attempted to argue, but every sentence was crushed under new proof. The judge listened, took notes, then ruled. Temporary custody returned to Josie Brennan. Troy Brennan restricted to supervised contact. A formal hearing to determine permanent custody to follow. Josie sat in the courtroom, hearing the decision, and did not react. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She nodded once, like a patient hearing the words, "The tumor is benign after 2 years of waiting. Relief too large for language." The visitation room, 2nd floor, 3 in the afternoon. Josie sat in a plastic chair, hands on her thighs, back straight, eyes fixed on the door across from her. Sawyer waited behind her in his wheelchair, 3 meters away. Rafe stood beside him, arms folded, face carved from stone. The social worker opened the door, and there she was, holding an adult's hand. A little girl, 5 years old, curly brown hair, wide round eyes, a purple shirt, her favorite color, the color Josie had described to Sawyer in the dark hospital hallway months before. She stood at the threshold, scanning the room with the wary gaze of a child used to being passed between adults, without understanding why. Then her eyes found Josie. Mama Joe? Josie dropped to her knees, both knees on the floor, arms open. Her mouth parted, but no sound came, because there are moments when language, any language, is too small. Phoebe let go of the social worker's hand. She ran, small shoes striking the floor, 3 steps, 4, colliding into her mother. 2 tiny arms wrapping around Josie's neck, her face burying into her shoulder. I draw for you every day, Mama, Phoebe said, her voice soft and trembling. I draw a lot, but nobody sends them to you. Josie broke, completely broke. Not the quiet crying in a bathroom stall, not the quick wipe and step back into composure. She broke like a levee giving way, like 2 years of held tears finally finding an exit, like a mother holding the child she had believed lost forever. She held Phoebe so tightly the girl squeaked that Mama was squeezing too hard, and Josie loosened her grip a little, then held her again, loosened and held, because she didn't trust it, didn't dare trust it, afraid that if she let go, her daughter would vanish back into the nightmare of the past 2 years. Sawyer sat behind them in his wheelchair. Tears ran down his face. Quietly. He didn't wipe them away. Rafe stood beside him and turned toward the window, swallowing hard, jaw clenched. 2 men, one a paralyzed crime boss and the other a right hand made of steel who had killed with his bare hands, standing there crying over a 5-year-old girl in a purple shirt, clinging to her mother in a courthouse visitation room. Josie lifted her head. She looked at Sawyer over Phoebe's shoulder. Her eyes were red and swollen, tears still falling, but in them was something he had never seen before. Wholeness. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking. 2 words carrying the weight of 2 years of separation. 2 years of staring at her daughter's photograph every night. 2 years of calling for 5 minutes and being denied. 2 years of crying in bathrooms and stepping out composed. You saved my life, Sawyer replied. This is just me keeping my promise. Phoebe pulled back from her mother's shoulder. She turned and studied Sawyer with the wide, serious gaze of a 5-year-old, evaluating the world more simply than adults ever can. Who are you? She asked. Sawyer smiled. A different smile than any he had worn before. Not sharp, not guarded, not cold, just warm. I'm your mama's friend, he said. Phoebe tilted her head, solemn as if considering a candidate for the most important position in her life. Do you like purple? Starting today, I do, Sawyer answered. Phoebe nodded, satisfied, and wrapped her arms around her mother again. And in that small visitation room, in that world of 3 scarred adults and 1 little girl who loved purple, for the first time, it felt like home. 6 months since the night Sawyer Maddox woke to the smell of antiseptic and realized he couldn't feel his legs. 6 months since Camille disappeared with the money and the engagement ring. 6 months since Josie Brennan walked into his hospital room, looked at him with eyes that held no pity, and asked whether he planned to lie there and die or get up and fight back. Today was the comprehensive evaluation. Dr. Pham arrived early, more serious than usual, carrying a thick chart on a clipboard and graphs Sawyer had learned to read upside down from his wheelchair. Sensation check, reflex check, muscle strength check, range of motion check. Sawyer followed every instruction. Silent, patient, the kind of patience he didn't have 6 months ago but had learned, day by day, rep by rep, bite by bite, on a hospital bed while his body refused to cooperate. Doctor. Pham took notes, nodded, then set the pen down. I want to try the parallel bars, he said. Sawyer went still. Parallel bars, 2 metal rails set parallel about 2 feet apart. Used to learn to walk, used to stand, used to fall. The last time Sawyer tried to stand was in the 2nd month. Too early, too eager, too proud, and he'd smashed his face into the floor in front of Dr. Pham, in front of Josie. And it took him 6 weeks to recover in body and in spirit. That memory lived in him more vividly than any other. The betrayal of his legs, the impact, the taste of blood, and the silence afterward, a silence heavier than the bullet. I'm not ready, Sawyer said. Dr. Pham looked at him. His gaze wasn't soft, and it wasn't hard. It was simply certain. The certainty of someone who had read thousands of charts and could tell the difference between a body that wasn't ready and a mind that was afraid. You're ready. Trust me. Josie stood near the parallel bars. She didn't say a word. Her eyes stayed on Sawyer, not pushing, not panicking, simply there, steady, the way she'd been there for 6 months, every morning at 5 and every night when he couldn't sleep. And on a small chair by the wall, Phoebe sat with her feet not reaching the floor, hugging her newest drawing, purple spread across the page, her wide eyes watching Uncle Sawyer like she was watching a cartoon. She'd been living with them for 3 weeks. 3 weeks in which the small apartment had changed completely. Crayons on the kitchen table, drawings taped to the fridge, tiny shoes by the door, giggles echoing from the bathroom during bath time, the scent of children's shampoo threaded through the smell of morning coffee. 3 weeks in which Sawyer learned something he hadn't expected. Having a child in the house didn't make everything louder. It made everything truer. Sawyer looked at Phoebe. Phoebe looked back. She nodded, solemn, as if granting permission. He rolled to the parallel bars. "Doctor." Pham stood in front, ready to catch him. Josie stood to his right. Sawyer set both hands on the metal rails. Cold, hard, just like 6 months ago. But his hands were different now, not trembling from fear. Trembling from waiting. He breathed in. Deep. He pushed. His arms locked down on the bars. His body rose. His feet met the floor. His knees shook. His thighs screamed. His spine sent a signal that hadn't existed 6 months ago. Pain. But pain meant connection. Pain meant the nerves were talking. Pain meant life. 5 seconds. Standing. Sawyer stood. Not steady, not pretty. Both hands gripping the metal until his knuckles blanched, face flushed, tendons taut in his neck, but standing. 10 seconds. Holding. His legs still trembled but didn't fold. His knees still wobbled but didn't buckle. 15 seconds. The shaking grew stronger. His body wanted to sit. His brain wanted to sit. The memory of that earlier fall screamed in his ear. Sit down. Safe. Don't risk it. 20 seconds. Still standing. Sawyer Maddox, the Southside Chicago Mafia boss whose legs had been stolen by a bullet, whose wealth had been stolen by a fiancé, whose territory had been stolen by a brother, was standing on his own 2 feet, in a small physical therapy room on the 3rd floor, in front of a Vietnamese doctor, a woman he loved with damp hair, and a 5-year-old who loved purple. "You're standing," Josie whispered. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. "Uncle Sawyer can stand." Phoebe clapped. Her drawing slid off her lap, but she didn't reach for it. She was too busy clapping, too busy laughing, too busy sharing joy. She was too young to understand and too sensitive not to feel. Dr. Pham wrote in the chart, voice calm, but eyes bright. "Real progress. If you keep going, you might be able to walk with a cane. No promises. But it's possible." Sawyer lowered back into the wheelchair, breathing hard. 20 seconds. 20 seconds on his feet. The smallest achievement in the history of the human race, and the biggest achievement in the history of his life. That night, the balcony of the small apartment, Phoebe was asleep in the tiny bedroom that 3 weeks ago had been a storage room, and now held a little bed, a star-shaped nightlight, and 20 drawings taped to the walls. Chicago glittered below. Millions of lights, millions of stories, millions of broken people trying to heal in the windy city. Josie sat on a plastic chair with her legs tucked up, a mug of hot tea cradled in both hands. Sawyer rolled beside her. Silence. Breathing. Then he spoke. "Josie Brennan." She turned to look at him. "I don't have a ring. I don't have an empire. I stood for 20 seconds today, and that's the biggest thing I've done all day. I live in a small apartment instead of a mansion. I can't promise you luxury. I can't promise I'll ever walk normally. I can't promise the world will stop trying to knock us down." He paused, swallowed. "But I love you with everything I have left. And what I have left, after losing the empire, losing the money, losing my legs, is more than I ever had before. Because I have you. I have Phoebe. I have Rafe. I have 20 seconds on my own 2 feet. He looked at her. "Marry me." Josie stared at him. A long moment. Then she laughed. The kind of laugh with tears braided through it. The kind of laugh of someone who doesn't quite believe in happiness and is suddenly holding it. "You're proposing without a ring on a tiny little balcony. I'm proposing with the only thing I've got that still matters. My heart. All of it. No returns." Silence. City lights flickered below. October wind carried the scent of Lake Michigan across the balcony. "Yes," Josie said. "Yes. 1,000 times yes. A kiss. On a tiny balcony. No diamond ring. No 5-star restaurant. No kneeling. Because he was in a wheelchair. No perfect proposal. Just 2 broken people. who had healed enough to hold each other in a Chicago night, while the world below kept turning, and time on the 7th floor paused long enough for two hearts to find the same rhythm. Then, from the little bedroom, through the cracked door, Phoebe's sleepy voice floated out, tangled with a yawn. "Mama, Uncle Sawyer is kissing you, right?" Silence. Josie looked at Sawyer. Sawyer looked at Josie, and then they both burst into laughter. It broke open into the night, and spilled over the balcony, and drifted down into the city. Laughter unrestrained, unafraid, unhidden. The first laughter that was truly free since this story began, and in the small bedroom, Phoebe turned over, hugged her pillow, and fell back asleep, her mouth curved into a tiny smile. Because even at 5 years old, even without understanding everything, she knew one thing. Mama was happy, and Uncle Sawyer made Mama happy, and that was all she needed to know. The wedding took place on an October Saturday, in a small garden outside Chicago that Rafe had found, where rows of maples burned yellow, and the fall sun slipped through the canopy and scattered bright flecks across the grass like someone had poured gold onto the ground. 25 guests. No more. No media. No cameras. No one except the people who truly mattered. Rafe standing behind Sawyer, Attorney Bowen seated in the front row, Dr. Pham and his wife, a few nurses from the rehab center who had cared for Sawyer for months, and the women from the shelter where Josie had once lived, the women who had held her when she cried and saved her a place when she left. Sawyer stood at the end of the aisle, standing, with a walker, both hands locked around the metal frame, legs shaking but holding on willpower, holding on 6 months of training, holding on the promise he'd made to himself the night he proposed on the balcony, that on his wedding day he would stand. Phoebe came out first, flower girl, a purple dress. Of course it was purple, because no other color existed in Phoebe Brennan's world. She carried a small basket and scattered petals along the aisle, with the absolute seriousness of a 5-year-old entrusted with the most important mission of her life. Each petal was placed carefully, precisely, as if she were building a road for Mama to walk. Josie appeared at the head of the aisle, a simple white dress, no veil, hair down, and the long scar on her left arm clearly visible under the autumn sun. She didn't cover it. She didn't hide it. That scar was the map of her life, proof she had survived. A reminder that the woman walking the flowered path today had once run barefoot from a blade with blood on her face. She walked. Slowly. No one led her. No father giving a daughter away at the altar. Josie Brennan walked on her own, the way she had walked on her own for 27 years, and every step down that aisle was a declaration. I'm here by my own strength. I'm choosing this man by my own will. I'm not the woman who gets dragged anymore. Sawyer watched her. His legs had been trembling since minute 8. Rafe stood right behind him, half a step away, hands ready to catch, eyes tracking every shiver in the walker's frame. Sawyer signaled with a small shake of his head. No. And he held. 10 minutes. 11. 12 minutes standing on shaking legs through the vows, and those 12 minutes were the longest and the most beautiful 12 minutes of Sawyer Maddox's life. The vows weren't scripted, not written, not rehearsed, Sawyer said. I used to be the man everyone feared and no one loved. I built an empire out of fear, and I thought that was strength. Then I lost everything, lying in a hospital bed, unable to move, and I learned that fear doesn't make anyone stay. You showed me there's another way to live, a way built on truth instead of control, on courage instead of power, on love instead of possession. I swear I'll live that way, every day, with you, with Phoebe, until this heart stops beating. Josie said, I used to be the woman no one believed and no one stayed for. I got so used to being abandoned that I thought it was normal. Then you showed up, in a wheelchair, in a room that smelled like antiseptic, angry at the whole world, and somehow you became the first person who stayed, not because you needed me, because you chose me. Every day, even when the world told you not to. I swear I'll choose you back. Every day, for as long as I'm breathing. Phoebe stood between them, the flower basket now empty in her hands, her big eyes lifted to Mama and Uncle Sawyer, and when the pastor said they could kiss the bride, she clapped in front of everyone. Out in the garden, on the gift table, there was a bouquet of white flowers with no card, no note, no sender's name. Sawyer looked at it and knew. Wade. No words, no explanation, just white flowers. And Sawyer gave the bouquet a small nod, as if nodding to his brother somewhere out there. That was enough. 6 months after the wedding. Spring. Chicago waking up after a long winter. And on Wells Street, in the 12th District, a 2-story red brick building opened its doors for the first time. A white sign with blue lettering. The Phoenix Center. A free recovery center for survivors of domestic violence and people with disabilities. Josie ran the women's support program. She built it from 4 years of being beaten, 2 years of losing her child, and 6 months living in a shelter. She knew what the women walking through Phoenix's doors needed, not because she'd read it in a book, but because she had been them. Sawyer handled finances and strategy. His ability to read people, negotiate, build networks, and manage resources, everything he had sharpened for 15 years in the underworld, now served a different purpose. He still used his wheelchair most of the time, used a cane when he needed to, and ran the center with the same sharpness that once made the south side of Chicago tremble. Except now no one was afraid of him anymore. On opening day, a reporter asked, "After everything, how do you feel?" Sawyer looked through the glass, where Josie was guiding a young woman with a bruised eye through an intake form, where Phoebe sat drawing on the hallway floor, where Rafe stood by the door with arms crossed, guarding, because even if the world had changed, Rafe was still Rafe. "A year ago I woke up paralyzed and abandoned," Sawyer said. "I thought my life was over. Then a woman walked in and refused to let me quit. She didn't save me. She taught me how to save myself." The reporter wrote it down. But what the reporter couldn't write down was Sawyer's expression in that moment. The look of a man who had been through hell and discovered that heaven isn't some far-off place. Heaven is a small apartment, with a little girl drawing on the floor, and a woman with her hair down reading case files on the sofa. That afternoon, Phoebe ran down the center's hallway holding a new drawing, ran straight to Sawyer, and lifted it up. On the page, 2 adults, one sitting on something with wheels, one standing beside them, and in the middle a curly-haired little girl. At the top, scribbled in purple marker, crooked block letters, "My family." Sawyer held the drawing, looked at it, and smiled the kind of smile he hadn't known he was capable of a year ago. The last night, the balcony, the small balcony that had witnessed everything, sleepless nights, a ringless proposal, Phoebe's laughter, and now the peaceful quiet of 2 people who had survived the storm. Josie rested her head on Sawyer's shoulder. Phoebe slept in her room. Chicago breathed below them. "You know," Josie said softly, "there's something worth more than healthy legs." "What is it?" "A heart that finally understands what it means to be whole." Silence. Lake Michigan wind carried the scent of water and late spring. "This isn't the end," Sawyer said. "No." Josie smiled. "It's just the beginning." And the story of Sawyer Maddox and Josie Brennan didn't end on that balcony night. It kept going, every day, in Phoebe's laughter, in the lights of the Phoenix Center, in every woman who stepped through the red brick door and found hope, in every wheelchair patient who heard the words Josie had said to Sawyer on the first night, "Are you only strong when life is easy?" If you've made it this far, I want to ask you a question. In your life, has anyone ever stayed when everyone else walked away? Have you ever been the one who stayed for someone when the whole world turned its back? Sawyer and Josie's story is fiction, but the pain inside it is real. The loneliness of being abandoned is real. The fear of losing a child is real. And love, the kind of love that isn't perfect, isn't flashy, but stays, that kind of love is real too. It exists, out there, in your life, in mine, in ours. The biggest lesson this story leaves behind isn't about the mafia or courtrooms or physical therapy. It's much simpler than that. Never let life's bullet decide how you live. You fall, you hurt, you lose, but you get back up. It might take 20 seconds. It might take 20 years. But you get back up. I really want to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Which character touched you the most? Which moment made you cry, or smile, or think of someone in your own life? Write it in the comments. Share your story. Because every comment you leave isn't just words on a screen. It's a voice from the heart. And we read every line. We listen to every word. If this story touched you, please hit like. That's how you tell Sawyer and Josie they mattered. Please share this video. Because out there someone is convinced no one will stay. And maybe this story will remind them that someone will. And if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe and turn on notifications. Because every day, we bring you stories like this. Stories that reach the deepest places in your heart, and we don't want you to miss them. I wish you, the person watching this video, very good health, a joyful life, a peaceful heart, and days filled with calm. No matter how hard life gets, remember you deserve to be loved. You deserve to be stayed for. You deserve to rise again. Goodbye, and I'll see you in the next video.